where bullies come from. Because you know younger guys who would hog-tie a boy and not do anything about leaving him in a field stripped down to the Bengay in his jockstrap. Go ahead and say it. Could be worse when it isn't you. Because you say we're not born to hate, that there's no such thing as evil birth. Believe that. Not because boys will be boys alone to the dark, careful not to shift too hard or careful not to cut eyes the wrong way with nothing but faith. Rather, your birth to this world, exposed and thirsty, how you look when you're helpless. Because you believe that it's necessary that we are all born, to be born, to stay born, that it's worse to live with the fact that there are countless ways to not set foot in a patch of yard that didn't want you there in the first place, to do everything you could to not end up there in the first place, to do something, anything that didn't involve the binding of another human in the first place, but said nothing. Look past the obvious. Think about what I'm not saying. Maybe one day you'll grow up. Because maybe one day it will be the worst thing you've done. Welcome to Binder. I'm Ray McManus. Anytime we get a chance to get Drew out of the box, or the closet really is what it is. It's a closet that he sits in the dark. But we can get him out of there and bring him into the studio. And for he and I to be able to interact is always a pleasure. Because honestly, y'all don't know, but when he is not interacting with me, he's really yelling in my earpiece, Ray, that question is too long. Ray, come on, man, calm down. Ray, you're breathing too hard in the microphone. Stuff like that. So if he's out here, he can't yell at me. And I can just talk and talk and talk. But as always, my man, it is a pleasure to have you with us, Drew.
It's a pleasure to be here. And don't worry, because I'm taking mental notes of everything you're doing. You're going to get a long email later.
Oh, so much of this will be on the cutting room floor.
It's true. So, Ray, good to be here again. I, as always, don't like to say too much. So instead, I'm bringing you a question today. I thought it'd be a fun way to get things started. Have you ever been the new guy, Ray?
Yeah. Yeah, I've been the new guy. We moved out to rural Lexington County, I think the summer before second grade. So I grew up in the Gilbert area pretty much my whole life. Went to school there from second grade all the way to when I graduated. But I always felt like I was an outsider because my family wasn't from there. I'm in class with people who's had aunts and uncles or brothers and sisters who went to that school. Sort of this legacy that was kind of there. And I was always sort of treated as if I was there, but not from there, even though I felt like I was pretty much just as from there as anybody else. So that was the start of it. That feeling that I had growing up stayed with me in college. And then fast forward even farther, and now I'm, in the world of academia where there is a constant sense of newness. I always pass because I'm a white male. And so, it doesn't really resonate that way to other people. But, I know the feeling of not necessarily feeling like you're accepted because maybe you talk different or, in my case, dress different or wore your hair different. But I think that given who I am, again, as a white male, I had a lot more advantage to being able to do that than perhaps a lot of other people have.
Yeah, I think that's kind of one of the things I wanted to talk about, Mm-hmm. So for me, I was a military brat, right? Like we moved around constantly. Mm-hmm. It was every couple of years, pack up, move to a completely different state, start over, But I always really enjoyed that. I kind of felt like it gave me a new fresh start everywhere I went, And in my own mind, I really kind of saw it as I'm going to build a new identity, right? Now I'm going to be a skateboarder, but that wasn't really building an identity, right? That was a really superficial, now I hold a skateboard, but did it make me a different person? No, not necessarily. And in thinking about that mentality almost came from a place of privilege, right? To like think that I could like just change my identity when I wanted to change my identity, or that the like superficial things that I was doing were actually changing my identity. I think about people like the artists that we have today, Anila Agha, and she never had that luxury, you know?
No, not at all.
She, when she walks into a room, she's a woman. She's like a person from a different country, at least since she's been in the US. All these things that are put onto her because of her identity.
And we're both talking about the fact that we have access, you know, to be able to change and mold and adapt to an identity that we feel comfortable with. But what we're really talking about here is privilege, you know, and I think people forget that when we think about white privilege, we often equate that to the justice and injustice in this country, and rightly so. But a major part of that is also identity, because Drew can be the skateboarder this year and the computer geek the next year. And I can, you know, be the raving, you know, half drunk poet and then the professor. We can do those things. But for people of color, unfortunately, are often seen as only that.
It's gotten me thinking about that quite a bit. And a few months ago, Anila came in here to preview the exhibition space and get ready to build her exhibition here. And we actually had the opportunity to interview her while she was here. I thought maybe we could share a little bit of this interview and you could check it out and hear it for yourself, Ray.
Yeah, let's listen.
I was born and raised in Pakistan, specifically in Lahore, which is an extremely large city teeming with hundreds of thousands of people. I think once I became an adult and I started art school, that was around the first time I think I became aware of inequities in our society. As a woman growing up as a young adolescent, it was difficult to be a female there. There were so many don'ts, not so many, yes, you can do this. And so once I graduated, I realized that there was a glass ceiling above my head that I couldn't break through. And I am a displaced person. At the time, I wanted more challenge. And so I came here with my young son and my husband of that time. That first year was great. You know, it was me becoming more acclimatized to the city and driving and all that. After 9/11, I realized that there's a lot of hidden stuff that I wasn't familiar with. I remember I applied for a job at a Calvin Klein store, and this young black man hired me on the spot because I know a lot about textiles, and he was excited to have somebody who knew about fabrics. And then the manager showed up the next day when I reported to work, and she refused to hire me. And I thought it was a mistake. I sat outside for 2 hours waiting for her to change her mind. That was really the first time I was racially profiled. It took me years after, and really going to grad school and understanding and reading and realizing how integral to this society racial classification is. I knew that education was the only way to move forward. I mean, I've taught hundreds of kids, and I feel very privileged that I have been able to tell them about Pakistan and the subcontinent and about things that happen in other parts of the world. And I try to create tolerance and a sense of belonging through my work and my teaching. And I think it's my way to get back to my community now.
I think culturally, we're so biased in our own history and not going back and really taking the time to learn the world's history, you know, and the history of all of these different individuals that have come together to kind of help us create this greater like humanity. And so I was like, I love that you're like out there trying to do that, even though, how long have you been here now?
So this year would be 21st year for me.
So you've been here over 2 decades now, and you're still making an effort to bring what you loved about your culture here and like incorporate that into like our culture. And I think that's like a beautiful thing.
My experience was that my son had the tendency of not wanting to learn the language that I grew up with. And it's because he wanted to belong. And he was already ostracized by his class fellows in grade school. That it was hard for him to say, hey, this is a great thing that I am bringing, another language to my mix. So I understand why young people, the first generation, will always be open to bringing what they came with. The second generation will negate it slightly, but find it again a little later in their lives. And then the following generations will go back to recreate it because it gives them an identity. And it's all about identity, isn't it? That's the integral human quest of who you are. Where do you come from? I mean, when you walk into a party, what is the first question people ask you? What's your name? And if it's a different name, they'll say, where does that come from? So there's an interest in it because it makes the multicultural environment so much more vibrant.
You're very right. And actually, this is I feel like a really great segue to kind of talk about your work a little bit, because one thing that really stands out to me is the fact that it is experiential, and that becomes an experience that the community shares. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you're going to be bringing to the museum?
So the subject matter is really vast, and unfortunately, you can't be succinct about it, but I will give it a try. I grew up in a country where pattern was part of the craft traditions of almost every kind of craft. I also love architecture, and so the two pieces that I'm bringing to the Colombia Museum of Art are going to be architectural in scale, but they also then do a projection which creates an environment where the white cube of the gallery turns into the art itself. And so when people move through it, they become itinerant shadows that participate in changing the landscape of the shadows. And I think that that's a beautiful poem in itself, because what it's telling us is that nobody's shadow is useless. It's always useful. The reason why I talk about that is because the experiential environment allows you to be intimate with yourself, but also intimate with strangers, because it casts you in this half zone where recognition is not based on race or gender or color or class or what kind of shoes you're wearing or what type of handbag you're carrying. And so it puts you on the same footing as everybody else. And the cast shadows become intermingled with the patterns that are on the walls. So it creates almost like an equilibrium of sorts where you're starting anew. And it allows you to communicate and create a dialogue that is about intimacy, yet a shared experience. The reason why I make these pieces initially was because I wanted my grad school classmates and my professors to be aware of where I came from, because often I was told, make work that is more Euro-Western, because that's your audience now. And I was like, that doesn't fit with me. I'm not from here. My experiences are not from here. I had almost no representation of people of color in my faculty. So it was like I was being dammed up, and not in the DM and ED sort of way, but more like I was being stopped from exploring my own background. I want to tell these people that my history goes back centuries. We cannot say that our history started when I was born or you were born. It's much vaster than that. And that also informs my work, because I find it just mind-boggling that there have been centuries of human development. We have grown so big and we have conquered so much, and yet we can't conquer race and class. And, it just boggles my mind that we are unable to move forward from that. So I was thinking about my place in the world as a woman, both in Pakistan and here as an immigrant, and how I was discriminated in both locations. And then I had the opportunity to travel to Spain to go and visit the Alhambra Palace. It was like being in this patterned heaven. The floors are tiled with beautiful colors and patterns. The walls are stuccoed with plaster but cut into and cutouts and everything. And the reason why it made such an impression on me was it felt like I was home in Pakistan, where there are similar historical buildings, yet there was this divide where women were expected to be in a certain private space and men were expected to be in public space. And nobody was chasing me out of the Alhambra. I was there by choice and it felt like home. So I wanted to create that sense of belonging. And it made me feel like this is what humanity created. Why can't we do this? We can be better than what we try for. So when I came back to the United States, I decided that I was gonna make something that would be akin to that experience I myself had.
I think one point that I see when looking at these is this masculine-feminine duality that you have going on, right? So you have these very light and floral pattern work built through these like hard steel edges. Can you like talk a little bit about that and like just the process of how you chose this medium to begin with?
Well, when I finished my graduate studies, I started making these drawings that I would cut out. And then I would create a buttonhole stitch around the cut edges to almost like create healing spaces. And then I would put them in shadow boxes. So even though they were drawings made out of paper, they still were sculptural because I was even then interested in the shadows. I love to create this dichotomy of like heavy and fragile or heavy and light, delicate and strong, steel and cutouts. So the light creates almost this sense of fragility that happens, but the structure is so solid. The contradiction. Men have been attributed with working with steel and architecture, and women are attributed with making homes. So I took that and I decided that I'm going to make it into this contradictory space that would allow me to use the decorative aspects and yet convert them into this environment that makes people feel. Like if I'm listening to a poem or I'm reading a book that really touches my heart or looking at a sunset, it brings a tear to my heart. I wanted that feeling to be created. I wanted to do that to other people.
Anila Quayyum Agha is a Pakistani-American artist working in immersive sculptural installations. Her work has been exhibited nationally and internationally, including at the Peabody Essex Museum, National Sculpture Museum in Valladolid, Spain, the Dallas Contemporary Art Museum, Cincinnati Art Museum, and right here at the Colombia Museum of Art in Let a Million Flowers Bloom, opening February 19th. Up next, a good friend of mine stops by.
I had sent some poems home, and my dad said something like, I don't know how to read poetry. It wasn't that he didn't like it or disapproved. It was just like, I don't understand that.
Ed Madden, after this quick break.
Hey y'all, producer Drew here to fill up your social calendar for September with some exciting CMA programming. On September 8th and the 14th, take a tour and get a new perspective on Amanda McCaver's Bright Little Day Stars with volunteer coordinator and installation assistant Jackie Palmieri. On September 22nd, grab a cocktail and a seat for a panel discussion featuring Carol Suvion, executive producer and director of the Peabody Award-winning and Emmy-nominated PBS series, Craft in America. On September 25th, get your dancing shoes ready for Shay Alexander Presents Live on Boyd Plaza with popular Charlotte-based outfit Reggie Graves and Jazz Theory. You can find out more about these and all of our upcoming programs and events on our website, www.columbiamuseum.org. And now, back to the show.
Wrestling, or Fable with Shag Carpet and Beanbag Chairs. In this corner, my brother, grinning. In that, my young uncle, flexing. After dinner, time for the games. In an arena bounded by sofa and window, by our parents listening from the kitchen, we mimicked moves we had seen on TV, standards of spandex and skin, boys learning the throw and pin. This was before the den's deep swank, its shag, its fireplace, its beanbag chairs. This was before sin. On this side, light. On this side, darkness. Between them, the lunge, the chokehold. Tagged, I'd take my place in the ring, take my stand, my stance, assume the position. This was before Little League football, before the house burning down, before the clue in the embers. In this corner, a boy who will win. In this corner, a boy who will lose. I'm Ed Madden. I am a professor of English at the University of South Carolina. I'm also the director of the Women's and Gender Studies program, and I am the poet laureate for one more year of the city of Columbia, South Carolina.
I was telling Drew earlier the story. If it weren't for Ed Madden, there wouldn't really be a Ray McManus, at least not in this capacity. I mean, Ed didn't give birth to me, but he in a way gave birth to me. You know, it was an advisor that told me I needed to take your poetry workshop as an undergraduate. I didn't even realize you could take poetry workshops in college. And of course, that class was an absolute blast and I learned a lot. But you were the one who said, you need to stay here and do your MFA. And I didn't even know what an MFA was. Had I not followed your advice early on, who knows? But Ed has been a guide for me, a mentor, confidant, and a damn good friend. And I'm just proud to have you here with us.
Well, thank you.
You are involved in a lot of projects, but this one particular one that you've been involved in, which I think has just been freaking awesome, has been the Poet Laureate of Colombia. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So it's the first city laureate in the state of South Carolina. The position was created in 2014. So it's a 4-year position and could be renewed once. So I'm now in the end of my second term and the end of my being city laureate. So this is my last year and I'm trying to do lots of projects this year. I love trying to think of ways to put poetry in public life. I think my favorite of all our projects is something we did on April 1st, 2017. It was the beginning of National Poetry Month, April. It was also April Fool's Day, and it fell on a Saturday, which is the one day they don't ticket downtown on weekends. And so we did 2,500 fake parking tickets with poems on them all over downtown that weekend. And we didn't let anyone know in advance, except we sent an image to the mayor, and he just wrote back, "Oh no." But, you know, we got more social media on that project than anything we've done. And we did no advance notice to anyone other than I solicited poems from a lot of poets around the state. And all I said was I wanted poems about parking or driving or cars. And then the night before, I sent them all images of their poems on fake parking tickets.
As one who's gotten lots of parking tickets, I'll take it out, behind the wiper and I'm like, please be a poem. Please be a poem. And it never is. On a personal level, what I think is so cool in seeing what you're doing now and even things that I'm doing now is that we didn't come from areas that typically yielded poets and poet laureates or even really professors.
I want to say, when I think back about it, that it might not have been valued, but it wasn't discouraged. So, I'm just thinking ages ago, I don't even know how old I was, but I was asked to write a poem for my great-grandfather's something birthday, 90th birthday or something like that. And looking back now, I just think how weird that they said, "Oh, write us a poem, Eddie." And I put it on a big poster board, and it was really awful about how things get better with age, like wine and cheese. And what did I know about wine as a fundamentalist kid in rural Arkansas? But there it was up on the wall, and I had drawn a nice sort of Italianate picture to go with it. And it was read for my great-grandfather's birthday. So I think of things like that. Or I even think about, all the other kids on the farm were into hunting and things like that. And I just remember this is going to sound, I don't know how it's going to sound. My grandma Lola, Granny Lola, my dad's mom, it was like she celebrated whoever you were. So if little Eddie wanted to cut flowers in the flower beds and press them between pages of the Reader's Digest in the back of the house, she helped me do that. And then she helped me make a little picture for my mama where I glued the dried flowers to a piece of blue paper and made a little Mother's Day card out of it. And I think back at things like that. So I think there are ways in which we come from a culture that might not value the arts or higher education in the ways we do. But I don't think it was necessarily discouraged, that there were places, there were pockets, there are ways in which we were enabled to become who we needed to become.
But did you find, though, that sort of treatment or that kind of attitude, though, kind of comes from a particular gender, though? I mean, where I grew up, I could see being encouraged to do things more so from my mom or my grandmother, but for my dad, it was almost like it was expected. Like I was supposed to move that and I was supposed to do it a certain way and it had to be done that way. And if it wasn't, I was going to have to do it again.
Yeah. I think you're right there. I remember trying so hard to be what my dad wanted me to be. I remember in junior high, I tried out for basketball. I had no desire to be on the basketball team, but I did because he had been a basketball player in junior high and high school. And I even wore his old Chuck Taylors. That's what I wore to try out. I literally was in my father's shoes, which were too small for me and gave me an ingrown toenail. But I was wearing his shoes to try out. I was secretly relieved when they announced who was cut after the first tryouts. I was exhausted.
Yeah, I get that too. I'll hear my dad talking to somebody else if I'm standing there and he's introducing me, and he will say something about, that I'm a published poet. So there's a part of me that feels like, okay, wow, man, he's
proud of you.
He's proud of me,
Yeah.
But then he'll say, I don't understand any of it, Or he did ask me one time if I wrote poems about him, and I'm like, Dad, I'm a guy in the South.
Of course you do.
Of course, every poem I've ever written is about you. Okay. But I think it's an interesting sort of way of growing up male in the South and being around all of the very stereotypical things you expect boys to be around, especially growing up on a farm, around cousins, around people at work. Did you find, though, that later on when you come out as a poet?
Nice turn of phrase.
Yeah, we'll get to the others later. But that would have been much later, right? I mean, that would have been, was that in grad school, college, or did they already just know that little Eddie was a poet?
Yeah, it's hard to say because little Eddie wrote poems, and I wrote poems in high school. They were all truly awful, but I did. And then I may be wrong, but I think probably one of the pieces my parents liked most was when I was a senior in college. I wrote an essay called My Father's Hands, and it was about my father. There we go again. It was an essay, not a poem, but it was a winner for the college literary prize or whatever. But I don't know. I honestly can't say that I can name a moment when I came out as a poet because I was always writing.
Do people back home, do they ever see your work in print? I know you send them stuff sometimes, but do you?
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I send them stuff sometimes. And then a few years ago at Christmas, I made a book of all the poems that were about growing up in Arkansas, including some I'd never published before, and an elegy I'd written for my uncle that I never published. And I only made enough copies to give to my cousins and my uncles and aunts, and that was it. I think I have 3 left at home, but it was just a book for them. But other than that, I don't really know.
Did they respond to it? Or?
Oh, they loved it. Yeah. And I know one of my aunts said she read it out loud from cover to cover. And my cousin, who was probably 5 or 6 years younger than me, we called him Bruiser when we were growing up. She said he just sat and cried.
Wow.
As she read it to him.
So yeah, everybody knew you were a poet or you were writing poems, even if you didn't call yourself a poet. So that when you came out, did they go, okay, that makes sense? Just kidding. Ed.
No,
to answer that.
It's funny. In my dissertation, I quoted, I'm trying to think of the guy's name, an early 20th century American poet who wrote to a friend of his about being gay and said, just say you're a poet and no one will know. It's like poet is the cover.
Right.
Some people did, less my family than my friends. My friends that are at grad school are like, oh, yeah, I thought that. I was just waiting for you to tell us. But my family, I honestly don't know. I mean, some of them were fine and some of them were not at all. Mm-hmm. And you know this, my folks basically didn't talk to me for almost 10 years. So it was a difficult thing.
So going back then, is difficult.
Yeah. My last book, Arc, was about going home. So when my father was dying of cancer, I went home to help with his hospice care. In one way, it was a very difficult place to be because I was in my old childhood bedroom, psychologically and emotionally, a really fraught place to be in. And my mother and my brother talk about that book. They say they don't want to remember him that way, but in some ways I do, because that was the moment after almost 10 years of silence. My father said, "I love you" every morning. Mm-hmm. So, for me, this was a chance to reconnect. Mm-hmm. Now, one other thing I had thought to say earlier when you were talking about whether people and family responding to us, I also would say that we police each other as kids. We police each other's gender performance. And I know this is really silly maybe, and I've written about it before, but it sticks in my memory so strongly. 7th grade, 2 of my friends telling me to stop carrying my books like a girl because it embarrassed them, because I was their friend and I was carrying my books clutched up to my chest like a girl would carry a baby. And again, that's silly. It's minor. It's 7th grade boys. But there's a way in which I think that suggests that consciously or unconsciously, it's not just our parents and our family who model and control how we perform who we are, but we police each other when it comes to gender. And I think junior high, we're especially anxious about doing gender right.
When you're wanting to write poems, and I know you don't wait for inspiration to come. I mean, I know there's coming from a variety of sources, right? But is that a theme that you're constantly kind of coming back to in terms of, for lack of a better word, identity? Or is this a theme that you just find that just keeps coming out in your work, whether you want it to or not?
Or both? I mean, that's a good question. We think hard about why we are the way we are. I wonder if this is less a concern generationally. I mean, when I teach classes now, I have students who say, "Oh, I didn't have any of those awful experiences. My family was great. My friends were great."
Right.
So when we're reading stuff with difficulties, it doesn't ring true for them. But I guess at least for me, and I think it's not just generational, it's the fact that I come from the place I come from. I am a little obsessed with trying to figure out why I turned out the way I did. So I do write about it a lot. And sometimes intentionally, like back when I was working a few summers ago, I bought the sex ed book on eBay that my parents had bought for me when I asked them questions in 7th grade or whatever it was. And just reading through that book just made me think of things that growing up, and made me think, and it had Bible verses. So I looked at the Bible verses, and so I just wrote tons of poems responding to those things. Some of them ended up in the third book, Nest. But so I say that, but don't we all sort of wonder about these things? I'm just remembering ages ago, I helped a nursing professor at USC edit a book called The Emergence of Man into the 21st Century. Very ambitious title. But I was expecting lots of essays about rites of passage and father-son relationships and rituals. And we got lots of poems and essays about not living up to what they thought they should be. It was all about failures of being masculine. Mm-hmm. And I'm just thinking, I'm a bad gay man. I don't watch RuPaul's Drag Race, but I'm fascinated right now because one of the contestants is a straight guy. And he's from Arkansas, where I'm from. Arkansas straight guy. But he said in an interview that growing up for him now, there are lots of ways to be queer, but there aren't lots of ways to be straight. And so part of his whole drag thing is just thinking, are there other ways to be a straight man in Southern culture?
Dr. Ed Madden is an author of 4 books of poetry: Signals, which won the 2007 South Carolina Poetry Book Prize, Prodigal Variations, Nest, and Arc. And if it weren't for Ed Madden, there would be no Ray McManus. So everything you hear here is his fault. It's hard to compartmentalize and codify who we are as a singular thing. The thing that may have stuck with me is the line from Whitman, "I contain multitudes." And I think each and every one of us are that way. We're multifaceted, we're complex, sometimes complicated. So when I think about, who am I don't think I could say that answer without the context of the question. Today, I am a host to a really cool podcast. At work, I am a professor. I am certainly not the professor at home, and I can be a poet if I want to be, and they know I'm going to be because I'm going to probably write poems about them. But, I'm the dad, I'm the husband, I'm the guy that won't shut up, or I'm the guy that they don't want to talk about things going on around because I'm going to interject with my own opinions like dads do. But I think ultimately, I guess that could come down to one answer. I'm a human being. I am completely fallible. I say things that I don't mean, do things that I probably shouldn't do and regret afterwards. But I am no better or no worse than anyone else because we're all human beings. You've been listening to Binder, a production of Columbia Museum of Art. Today's episode was hosted by me, Ray McManus, produced and edited by Drew Barron, with special assistance from Joel Ryan Cook. For more information about Binder, CMA exhibitions, and programs, please visit our website at www.columbiamuseum.org.
So that he doesn't have to fight.
So I'm not throwing things on the floor.
Yeah.
I don't.
Whoops. See, that's what I would do in the middle of the show.
Too, if that helps, anything like that.
And then when you did that, I would be narrating all the things you're doing. Ed is throwing things across the room.
Dropping things.
That's right. Well, it is an audio medium. You gotta describe it.
Okay.
Apparently, Ed did this kind of thing all the time in Arkansas.